The Indiana Fever's win over the Seattle Storm should have been a statement game, the kind of victory that cements a team's status as a legitimate playoff threat. On paper, it was their fifth straight win, an impressive feat for a franchise that has spent the last few seasons clawing its way out of the bottom of the standings. But the way it unfolded told a different story, one that Sophie Cunningham made impossible to ignore. Cunningham, who has made a career out of being both a spark plug and a truth-teller, was nothing short of spectacular. She shot 80% from beyond the arc, hitting contested looks, transition threes, and catch-and-shoot daggers that should have forced Seattle to change their entire defensive game plan. If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe. Yet despite her sizzling hand, the Fever's offense repeatedly ignored her. Instead of feeding the player who was clearly locked in, possessions ended in contested mid-range jumpers, rushed drives into traffic, and ill-advised isolation plays. The most glaring example came in the fourth quarter, when the Storm had just cut the lead to single digits. Cunningham was wide open in the corner, clapping for the ball. Instead, Kelsey Mitchell dribbled into a heavily guarded pull-up three, a miss that ignited Seattle's fast break and ultimately sparked their late 11-0 run. The building went quiet, and you could almost see the frustration radiating off Sophie's face. This wasn't just a case of one bad possession. It was a pattern, repeated over and over, despite Mitchell's horrific shooting night. 3 for 16 from the field, 0 for 8 from deep. She continued to take the same contested shots instead of finding the player who was burying almost everything she touched. In a league where ride the hot hand is an unwritten rule, the Fever seemed intent on rewriting the book in real time, and not in a good way. Cunningham's frustration is understandable. This is a player who thrives on rhythm and confidence. Every shooter knows that when you're in the zone, the rim feels like an ocean, and the ball is a stone you can toss in from anywhere. But that rhythm is fragile. Every missed opportunity to touch the ball, every forced shot by a teammate, chips away at it. It's not just about ego. It's about maximizing efficiency for the team. And that's where the coaching staff has to take some responsibility. Adjustments should have been made the moment it was clear Sophie was locked in. Call plays specifically designed to free her up. Use screens to get her open. Run her off pin downs. If she's shooting 80% from three, every trip down the court should have a contingency to get her a look. Instead, the Fever's offense remained stagnant, overly reliant on individual shot creation rather than exploiting the glaring mismatch in their favor. The lack of adjustments wasn't just bad strategy, it was dangerous. Seattle's late surge nearly stole the game. In the final 5 minutes, Indiana's lead evaporated because they abandoned ball movement entirely. Possession stalled, the shot clock ticked down, and they settled for contested heaves. Meanwhile, Sophie stood ready and open on multiple plays, the best shooter on the floor reduced to a spectator. This points to a deeper issue within the Fever, the absence of a clear offensive hierarchy. Teams that succeed in crunch time know exactly who's taking the big shots. For years, that was Reggie Miller for the Pacers, Diana Taurasi for the Mercury, or Sue Bird for the Storm. The Fever seemed caught between wanting to feature their established guards like Mitchell and fully embracing the rise of newer additions like Cunningham. That uncertainty leads to games like this, where the best option gets overlooked because no one is empowered to demand the ball. Cunningham's post-game comments, while measured, made it clear she was unhappy. She praised the win but noted that we need to be better at recognizing what's working and sticking with it. That's as close as you'll get to calling out teammates and coaches without naming names. And she's right. Recognition is one of the core components of basketball IQ. The ability to identify mismatches, understand momentum, and feed the hot hand separates good teams from great ones. Beyond the tactical concerns, this situation also exposes the Fever's ongoing chemistry issues. Chemistry isn't just about liking your teammates. It's about trust. Trust that if you're open, they'll find you. Trust that when someone is hot, the whole team will rally to keep that streak alive. Trust that decisions will be made with the team's best chance to win in mind, not just individual stats. The repeated snubs of Sophie's open look suggest that trust still isn't fully there. For a team eyeing a deep playoff run, this is a red flag. The Fever's recent winning streak has masked some of these flaws, but the margins get thinner in the postseason. Playoff basketball is slower, more physical, and heavily reliant on execution. If the Fever can't consistently identify and capitalize on their advantages, they'll get exposed quickly. What makes this even more frustrating for fans is that Sophie Cunningham has already proven she can be a game changer in high-stakes situations. Her energy, shooting, and defensive grit make her one of the most versatile players on a roster. She doesn't need 20 shots a night to impact the game, but when she's shooting 80%, you'd better believe she needs more than the handful she got in Seattle. The disconnect between her performance and her usage suggests either a stubborn adherence to game plan or a reluctance from certain players to defer. Neither is a good sign. Championship-caliber teams are adaptable. They shift their strategy on the fly to exploit whatever edge presents itself. Looking forward, the Fever have a choice to make. They can treat this as a lucky escape, chalk it up to an off night from certain players, and move on without addressing the underlying problem. Or they can use it as a turning point, a moment to establish a clearer offensive identity, and commit to recognizing when one player has it going. Sophie Cunningham's game against the Storm should be the blueprint, not just because of the numbers, but because of the way she got them, moving without the ball, hitting shots in rhythm, space in the floor, and keeping the defense honest. That kind of shooting stretches opponents, opening lanes for drives and forcing rotations that create even more open looks. It's the kind of performance you build an offense around for 40 minutes, not just sprinkle in here and there. If the Fever want to be more than just a nice story this season, they have to embrace that. Otherwise, they risk alienating one of their most valuable weapons. And as the Storm game showed, that's a risk they can't afford to take. The fans saw it. The analysts saw it. And you can bet Sophie saw it more than anyone. The ball has to find a hot hand, or eventually, the hot hand will grow cold. And so will the Fever's winning streak. What made this game even more of a lightning rod for discussion wasn't just the raw numbers. It was the body language. You could feel the tension on the court. Sophie Cunningham was making those decisive cuts, floating into open space on the perimeter, hands ready, eyes locked on the passer. But possession after possession, the ball never came. On one sequence in the third quarter, she ran a perfect flare screen, lost a defender by a full 2 steps, and stood open at the wing with the closest Storm player still scrambling out of the paint. The pass never came. Instead, the Fever forced up a low-percentage runner in the lane. Seattle grabbed the rebound, pushed the pace, and scored in transition. Cunningham clapped her hands once, then shook her head in disbelief as she jogged back on defense. This wasn't selfish frustration. This was a basketball player watching her team ignore a clear advantage. And that's where the bigger conversation starts. In a well-run offensive system, there's an unspoken hierarchy of decision-making. Find the mismatch, feed the hot hand, exploit the defense until it adjusts, and then pivot to the next advantage. The Fever, in this game, looked like a team still figuring out the first step, whether that's on the coaching staff for not emphasizing those reads, or on the players for failing to execute them. The result is the same: wasted opportunities. The coaching angle is particularly important here. During one of the second-half timeouts, cameras caught the Fever huddle. Rather than diagramming a set play for Sophie, who had been torching Seattle from deep, the focus appeared to remain on their usual offensive motion. No clear action was drawn to free her up. No double screen. No staggered baseline cut. Nothing that screamed, "Get Sophie the ball." That a missed chance to not only extend the lead, but also to send a message to the team. This is how we reward performance. And the risk of ignoring performances like this isn't just about that night's box score. It's about buy-in. When players see their efforts recognized and rewarded, they're more likely to sacrifice, hustle, and trust the system. But when a teammate lights it up and still doesn't get touches, it plants seeds of doubt. Why work this hard if we're not going to adjust? That's the question that lingers. This is especially pressing because Sophie Cunningham's game is tailor-made for momentum swings. She's not just a catch-and-shoot threat. She's an emotional spark. Every made three she hits, especially in rhythm, shift the energy in the building. The crowd gets louder, the bench comes alive, and the opponent feels that pressure. You can't manufacture that kind of momentum. You can only feed it. The Fever almost learned that the hard way. Seattle's late-game surge was fueled by exactly what Indiana failed to do: ride the momentum. The Storm identified their own hot hand, fed her relentlessly, and clawed back into the game. If Seattle had managed one more stop or hit one more open three down the stretch, this narrative would have been entirely different. We'd be talking about a collapse instead of a narrow escape. Kelsey Mitchell's night only magnified the problem. It's not unusual for a scorer to keep shooting through a slump. That's part of the DNA of many great players. But there's a line between confidence and stubbornness. When you're 0 for 8 from 3 and your teammate is hitting 80%, the math is pretty simple. Passing up a contested look to swing the ball to an open shooter isn't a concession. It's the smartest play on the floor. What complicates this further is a dynamic between veterans and rising contributors. Mitchell has been the go-to option for years, often carrying the Fever through lean seasons. Sophie, while respected, is still carving out a role in Indiana's offense that can make it harder to shift the pecking order, even for a single game. But leadership sometimes means knowing when to step aside and let someone else take the wheel. In championship-caliber teams, you see that flexibility. Look at how the Golden State Warriors pivot in games where Klay Thompson gets hot, even if Steph Curry is the franchise face. Look at how the Phoenix Mercury would feed Shea Petty or Sophie's former teammate Kia Nurse when they found their stroke. It's a recognition that winning basketball isn't about ego. It's about percentages and rhythm. That's the kind of mindset Indiana needs to adopt if they want this winning streak to mean something. Because right now, the streak is masking a fundamental issue. They're still not consistently making the highest percentage play available. Against struggling teams, they can get away with it. Against elite defenses in the playoffs, those decisions will be the difference between advancing and going home. There's also the public perception factor. Fans aren't blind. They can see when a player is clearly the most effective option and yet keeps getting passed over. Social media was buzzing after the game, with clips of Sophie waving her arms for ball and being ignored making the rounds. That kind of discourse can quickly spiral into locker room tension if it's not addressed internally. From a coaching perspective, there's an easy fix. Make a rule in film sessions that the hot hand gets priority touches until the defense shuts it down. It's not about diminishing other players' roles. It's about making everyone understand that efficiency drives the offense. If that means Mitchell takes fewer shots on a given night, so be it. On another night, she'll be the one getting fed. That's how balance works. Sophie, to her credit, hasn't gone scorched earth in the media. Her comments after the game stayed diplomatic, praising her teammates for finding ways to win while sliding that they can be better at recognizing matchups and momentum. That a veteran move. Address the issue without making it personal. But make no mistake, the subtext is there. She wants this team to evolve. And they'll have to, especially with tougher opponents looming on the schedule. The next few weeks will test whether Indiana can take these lessons and apply them. Will they recognize when Sophie's got the touch and structure the offense accordingly? Or will they keep defaulting to old habits and risk another near meltdown? The Fever are in a position they haven't been in for years, relevant, competitive, and capable of making noise in the postseason. But relevance is fragile. It only takes a few bad losses or a visible rift in the locker room to derail momentum. Feeding the hot hand isn't just about winning the night's game. It's about reinforcing the trust and cohesion that will carry this team deeper into the season. For now, Indiana can breathe a sigh of relief that Sophie's shooting display didn't go to waste in the loss column. But the warning signs are there, flashing in neon. Recognize your advantages, or someone else will exploit them. If the Fever want to turn this 5-game streak into something more meaningful, they need to start every scouting report and every in-game adjustment with one question: who's got tonight? And once they have that answer, everything else should revolve around it. Because if Sophie Cunningham is shooting 80% from deep and barely touching the ball, that's not just bad basketball. That's leaving wins on the table. And in a league as competitive as the WNBA, you can't afford to hand those away. What this whole situation really lays bare is the Fever's growing pains as they try to transition from being a team happy to steal a few wins into a team that can realistically dream about the postseason. You could see it in the little things: the hesitation in passes, the choice to dribble into traffic instead of swinging the ball to an open shooter, the reliance on old comfort zones rather than adapting to the flow of the game. For years, Indiana's offensive identity has revolved around a few go-to scorers taking on most of the load, even if it meant playing through inefficient nights. But that kind of system can't survive in a league where the margin between winning and losing is often a single possession. Sophie Cunningham's 80% from deep in this game was the basketball equivalent of holding a lottery ticket. All you have to do is cash it in. The Fever, for some reason, kept it in their pocket. It wasn't just a missed opportunity on the scoreboard. It was a missed opportunity to reinforce one of the most important lessons for a young, evolving roster: adaptability. Championship teams live on adaptability. They know when to lean on their stars and when to ride the unexpected hero. They sense when someone's in rhythm, and they feed them relentlessly. But Indiana looked almost afraid to break the script. That fear, whether it's fear of stepping on toes, fear of deviating from the coach's playbook, or fear of disrupting the pecking order, is exactly what can hold a promising team back. This also raises a question about the Fever's leadership structure. Who, in that moment, is supposed to take control and say, "Ball goes to Sophie until they stop her"? On some teams, that voice comes from the point guard, who directs the offense and recognizes mismatches. On others, it comes from the coach or from a vocal veteran on the floor. The Fever right now seem caught in a space where no one is consistently assuming that role. Kelsey Mitchell has resumed the lead in those moments, but leadership sometimes means deferring. Caitlin Clark, despite being a rookie, has a basketball IQ to make those reads, but she's still navigating when and how to assert herself without disrupting existing dynamics. Sophie herself could demand the ball more aggressively, but that risks coming across as selfish in a sport built on team play. That's why the culture set by the coaching staff is so important. If the system reinforces that exploiting the hot hand is not just acceptable but expected, no one hesitates. The decision becomes automatic, almost mechanical. You don't think twice about passing up a contested mid-range when you know you've got a teammate shooting lights out from behind the arc. Instead, what happened against Seattle was possession after possession of hesitation, of ignoring what was right in front of them. Every time Sophie drifted into open space and didn't get the ball, it chipped away at the Fever's rhythm. Seattle could smell it too. They tightened up their perimeter defense on her late. But for most of the second half, she was an afterthought in Indiana's offense. That's the kind of in-game scouting adjustment other teams will notice. Opposing coaches will watch that film and think, "We don't even have to panic. If she hits a couple early, they won't keep going to her." That's a dangerous reputation to build. It's worth remembering that Sophie isn't just any role player. She's a proven veteran with playoff experience, someone who's played on big stages and knows what it takes to win. When you got that kind of weapon in your arsenal, you can't treat her like an interchangeable part. And here's the thing, this isn't about taking away from anyone else's game. Feeding Sophie when she's hot actually makes it easier for everyone else. Defenses start collapsing toward her on the perimeter, opening up lanes for Mitchell to drive, for Boston to work inside, for Clark to slash and kick. It creates a domino effect of better looks for the entire team. The Fever's reluctance to seize that advantage might have been brushed aside if they'd won comfortably. But because the game tightened late, because Seattle went on that run and nearly stole it, the flaws were magnified. It showed how quickly a lack of offensive awareness can turn a sure win into a nail-biter. That's the kind of late-game collapse that can stick with a team mentally. Players start to remember the near misses more than the victories. It plants doubt about whether they can close out games against tougher opponents. And for a team still learning how to win consistently, that's a dangerous seed to plant. The solution isn't complicated, but it does require a shift in mindset. The Fever need to start approaching each game with a flexible game plan that allows them to pivot quickly when someone catches fire. They need to empower whoever's running the point to recognize those moments and call sets accordingly. And they need to have those sets ready, designed specifically to get a hot shooter open looks in multiple spots on the floor. That also means making peace with the fact that some nights, the usual stars won't take the most shots. If Sophie's rolling, it might mean Mitchell or Clark shoots less. On another night, it could be Mitchell's turn to go off, and everyone else adjusts to feed her. This isn't about ego. It's about maximizing winning chances. If Indiana can buy into that, Games like this one against Seattle become building blocks instead of warning signs. Sophie's 80% night becomes a rallying point for the team. Remember how we closed that one out when we kept feeding Sophie? Instead of a cautionary tale about missed opportunities. And here's the real kicker. This isn't just about basketball. It's about identity. The Fever are in the middle of redefining themselves as a franchise. After years of being an afterthought, they're finally relevant again. They've got talent, they've got fans filling arenas, and they've got a chance to build something sustainable. But part of that identity has to be intelligence, the kind of situational awareness that makes them dangerous in any matchup. That starts with embracing the obvious when it's staring you in the face. If Sophie Cunningham is hitting almost everything she puts up, you keep finding her until the defense sells out to stop her. Then you punish them for overcommitting. That's the kind of basketball that wins in the regular season and survives in the playoffs. If they don't make that adjustment, the Fever risk falling into the same trap that's plagued them for years. Playing hard, even playing well at times, but lacking consistency and adaptability to win when it matters most. The Seattle game should be a wake-up call, not just because they almost let it slip away, but because it showed how close they are to being the kind of team no one wants to face. The pieces are there. The talent is there. The momentum is there. Now it's about putting it all together and refusing to waste nights when one of your players is clearly in the zone. That's how good teams become great. And right now, the Fever are standing on that threshold. If they learn from this, Sophie's frustration will have been worth it. If they don't, they'll keep walking into games with a loaded weapon they refuse to fire. And in this league, someone else will happily pull the trigger.